I am here today with the SBMAA, or the Stop Book Movie Abuse Association, to spread what I think to be a very important message. So many lives have been taken, so many souls have been stolen by the clutching grips of unforgiving corporations. These corporations that have made films or movies based on beautiful, beautiful pieces of literature. What I like to call these films or movies is a cash grab. They don't care about their viewers. They just want money. And sadly, so many people have fallen victim to these terrible, terrible corporations. Now, we can't stop these corporations from making their terrible movies. But what we can do is spread awareness and tell people that there are actually some good book movies out there. And one of those movies is Troy. Now, one of the major similarities between Troy and Homer's Iliad is the relationship between Achilles and the Trojan woman Briseis. In both Troy and the Iliad, the Greeks land on the Trojan beach and then take their temple to Apollo. Now, in the temple to Apollo, there are many Trojan women that they take as spoils of war. One of these women is Briseis, and then she gets given to Achilles, and Achilles and Briseis fall in love with each other. But when Agamemnon, the Greek king, comes and takes Briseis from Achilles, Achilles gets very, very upset. This is demonstrated in both Troy and Homer's Iliad, and if they didn't put this in Troy, then the movie wouldn't be as good as it is, because it's really one of the strongest character relationships throughout the entire thing, because Achilles then refuses to go into battle with the Greeks for a very long time. The next big similarity I've found between Troy and Homer's Iliad is in direct relation to the capturing of Briseis. Now, Achilles is very distraught that Agamemnon has taken Briseis from him, so he refuses to charge into battle every day with the rest of the Greeks. But his friend Patroclus does not feel the same way, so Patroclus decides to take Achilles' armor and go into battle in order to trick the Trojans into thinking Achilles is actually there. Now, we all knew that Achilles wasn't there, but the Trojans didn't. They were actually tricked. So Hector is not as filled with fear as the rest of the Trojans are. So he decides to go and duel with Patroclus one-on-one. Eventually, Hector kills Patroclus, finding out that he wasn't actually Achilles, and this really infuriates Achilles. This is present in both Troy and Homer's Iliad. Now, of course, Achilles is infuriated over the loss of his fallen ally, Patroclus, so he decides to go to the walls of Troy and summon Hector out of them so he can duel with him and get revenge for the loss of Patroclus. So they duel, and Achilles eventually wins. Now, in both Troy and the Iliad, there's kind of a special thing that happens at the end of this duel, and Achilles ties Hector to the back of his chariot and pretty much just pulls him about the battlefield for a good hour or so. The time was never really specified, but I'll say that. Anyway, actually, my preference goes out to the film for this one, because it's kind of a hilarious scene to watch, with the rope being tied to Hector and just his limp body being just ragdolled about on the back of the chariot. It's just great. So that's a big similarity that I found, and not only because of the chariot part, but just because there is a desire for revenge within Achilles because of the death of Patroclus. Now, of course, there's also the Trojan horse, the most well-known part of the entire Iliad story. What it is that all the Greek generals get into this massive horse Odysseus and his men have constructed, and they push it up to the walls of Troy, outside the gate. Now, the Trojans are tricked into thinking this massive horse is a peace offering, and they take it into their city, inside the walls. Now, they all get drunk, and they party, and they're all excited that the war is over. But in the night, when they've all fallen asleep, the Greek generals get out and burn the city down and make their escape. This is present in both the Iliad and in Troy, and it's really important that it is included in Troy, because it's really just the biggest, most well-known part of the Iliad. If it wasn't in Troy, then the movie would probably suck. Now, one of the next big similarities between Troy and Homer's Iliad is the death of the warrior Achilles. Now, the way he dies is that Paris kills him. Paris is the Trojan prince. Now, what Paris does is that he decides that he's going to take all the valor of battle for himself, even though he's like the big coward that's really started the war. Now, he pretty much waits until Achilles is vulnerable when he's dueling another Trojan, takes a bow, knocks an arrow, and fires the arrow right into the heel of Achilles, which is his only vulnerable spot. So he kills Achilles and gets all the credit for himself. Now this happens in both Troy and in the Iliad, and it's really a major part. So Troy did a very good job about putting this in, because in Troy the biggest focal point is really Achilles, and it really adds an extra sense of emotion. Another similarity I found between Troy and Homer's Iliad is that the Trojans are always playing with fire and trying to burn the Greek stuff. They're really just complete pyromaniacs. In Homer's Iliad, they're notorious for always trying to break into the Greek camp and just burn their ships, their supplies, whatever they can burn, even if it's bodies, whatever. They just want to burn stuff. Now, in Troy, this happens as well. I mean, granted, different tactics are used. For instance, in Troy, they use these massive balls of hay that have been lit on fire. And in the Iliad, they just use torches and fiery arrows. But nonetheless, they still try to burn the Greeks' items, their ships, their supplies, etc. And it's really important that they put this in here, because it's a really, really smart battle strategy to try and burn the Greeks' supplies and ships, because if they're out of supplies, then they can't survive, and they'll die off. And if they don't have ships, then they can't retreat, and then the Trojans have pretty much won the war. I'm sure you're all out there thinking that Troy's a perfect movie, and this is where this starts to get a bit more depressing. Sadly, Troy is not a perfect movie. It does have its differences from the Iliad. For instance, there's no wall. The Greeks never build a big wall around their ships. There's really no fortification, which it's pretty bad, because there could have been some really, really good battle scenes in there, such as the ones from the Iliad where the Trojans are pushing the Greeks back towards their wall, and they're all falling into the big pit that they've conveniently put spikes in, like sharpened pikes in. It's you know, I really could have, I could have used that. Also, Ajax, one of the Greek warriors, dies really early on in Troy. Now, I wish he hadn't, because in the Iliad, he actually winds up committing suicide right towards the end of the war. Also, the focal points of Troy are kind of weird. In the Iliad, they're constantly jumping between characters. There's really no biased opinion on who's the best character, who's the best side. The Trojans are always being focused on, and when it's the Trojans, it's always a different character, and the Greeks are then being focused on just seconds later, and it's always a different character. But in Troy, it's either focusing on Hector or on Achilles. It's the rest of them are kind of static side characters that nobody really cares about. It's Achilles is the big guy, and Hector is the big guy. And Hector eventually dies, so then it turns into the Achilles show. The major plot difference I found between the Iliad and Troy is that Pandarus, the Trojan archer, never tries to restart the Trojan War. Now, how it goes in the Iliad is that the two sides, the Greeks and the Trojans, are at peace, and they're going to settle the war over a duel, and whoever wins the duel, their side becomes victorious. So Pandarus, of course, has to go and restart this whole war by shooting one of his arrows out into the Greek side. Now, he's encouraged to do this by Aeneas, and that leads me to my next point. Aeneas is kind of a major character, not really. He's a character found in the beginning of Troy, or not Troy, sorry, the Iliad, and he's never introduced in Troy. Now, in the Iliad, he's kind of important. He eventually goes off and finds Rome, as legend has it. But yeah, he's never really introduced in Troy. Now, a final similarity I kind of found between Troy and Homer's Iliad is that Helen in Troy and Helen in the Iliad are very different. In the Iliad, Helen is always being referred to. She's always like the big point. Everybody just wants Helen. However, in Troy, Helen's just kind of there as a reason. They kind of just say, okay, Paris took her, the Greeks want her, they're gonna have a war, but guess what? We have Brad Pitt, he's more important. So that kind of really annoys me. Helen really should have been put in more, but in the movie she's really objectified. There's not really much of a purpose other than, oh yeah, she started the war. There's no desire for her, really. There's no will for Menelaus to go and try to take her back from the Trojans. I just don't like it. That's probably the biggest issue I have with the entire Troy movie. Helen's just a stupid character. That's very opinionated, but she's just kind of there. She's actually got some good one-liners, but other than that, she's just kind of dumb. Now, Troy and Homer's Iliad do have their plot differences, but I think that the similarities in plot really outweigh these differences. The only difference that I really disliked was the undeveloped character Helen. That was a huge disappointment in my mind. But other than that, this movie shines through all the rest, especially in the world we live in today with all these big literature-based blockbusters. They really are just terrible films. Like, for instance, the Divergent movie, I didn't like it at all. Hobbit Part 3 was a pushover. That was unnecessary. I had Orlando Bloom in it as well, actually. Did I mention Orlando Bloom? And Brad Pitt? But anyway, yes, the film is definitely worth it, and it definitely sticks close to the epic. And in order to advertise this, I'm going to sell you a package deal today, consisting of Homer's Iliad, the epic, and Troy, the film. And I'm going to sell you these for just $19.99. That's an astonishing price for such a high-value package. And if that was not already enough, if you order within the next 15 minutes, I'll include an authentic Greek coin with Abraham Lincoln on it, because Abraham Lincoln was, in fact, in ancient Greece. Now, if you decide not to buy this package deal, I understand, but just keep in mind that there are some good book movies out there today. We here at the SBMAA, or Stop Book Movie Abuse Association, truly hope you have taken something from this public service announcement. And remember, you can always help our cause further by donating your hard-earned cash to us at sbmaa.org. Thank you for giving us your attention, and we hope to see you next time.